Good morning, everybody. This is a discussion of Section 2, Chapter 11, the circulation. It's going to talk about the human heart today. We have talked a little bit about the heart in some of our discussions on different kinds of animals, but we're going to get into specifics on the human heart today. First of all, we're talking about human heart, which is a mammalian heart. The mammalian heart, as we talked about earlier in the year, is a four-chambered heart. Along with the birds, the mammals have four-chambered hearts, and a few of the reptiles, not many, but a few, had evolved a four-chambered heart. The four-chambered heart basically is a double pump. It has one side of the heart that is the pulmonary circulation, and the other side is the systemic circulation in a closed circulatory system, which we've already talked about. One of the things that get a little bit misunderstood is the location of the heart. A lot of times people think that the heart is slightly on the left side of your chest, when in fact it's pretty much in the middle of your chest. But it does have some orientation differences. Basically, it's located in the middle of your thorax, your chest, between your lungs, and the heart itself has a pointed bottom portion, which we call the apex, and then the top wider portion is called the base. The apex is going to be tilted slightly to the left, where it will point to your left hip, and the top base part would be pointing toward your right shoulder. So it does sit in the middle of your chest, but it tilts slightly to the left, with the apex of the heart moving toward the left. And in terms of the right and left side, when you look at the heart, you're basically looking at the heart itself when you're naming it. So when you're orientating to answer questions about the heart, the parts of the heart should be labeled as if the heart were inside of the person facing you. So your left side is the right side, and your left side is your right side is the left side. So also, it's not as clear what's the right side and what's the left side of the heart, because it's not standard half of one side is the right, half of one side is the left. The heart is kind of rotated forward from the right side. So about a third of the heart that you see in front is going to be the right side that's rotated forward or anteriorly. And the back of the heart is going to be, a big part of the heart is going to be the left side of the heart. So it isn't clearly right side, left side. It's rotated from the right side toward the front of the heart, or toward the anterior part of the body. So not only is it not straight up and down, but it's not clearly right and left side. It has a little bit of a twist to it. Having said that, the parts of the heart that you're going to have to be familiar with are the upper chambers, the smaller chambers, which are called the atrium. Atrium is a singular term, atria plural term. The two bottom chambers are the large chambers, and they're called the ventricles. Basically, what happens in a heartbeat is that the atria, the top chambers, are going to squeeze in a downward motion, also using gravity to get blood to go downward into the ventricles. As a matter of fact, in normal circumstances, most of the blood goes from the atria down into the ventricle by way of gravity. The last bit of blood is squirted down into the ventricle by the finished contraction of the atrium. Now, the ventricles, on the other hand, are going to basically contract from bottom to top, squeezing the blood upward and toward the blood vessels that leave the heart. So with every contraction of the heart, the blood is going to move basically in one direction. Okay, you've got to keep that in mind when we talk about circulation. We're going to talk about a one-way movement of blood. and blood staying within a blood vessel all the time. In terms of heartbeat, the average adult is going to be about 75. As you're born, you're going to have a much faster heartbeat. An infant might have a heartbeat of about 150, whereas the heartbeat will slow down as you get toward your adult life. Also, males probably have a little bit slower heartbeat than females do. My heartbeat, for instance, is about 60, maybe lower, resting. My wife's heartbeat is more like 75. So the average is anywhere between 60 and 80, somewhere in there. And the average is what it is. It doesn't mean that you're ill or because yours is 10 higher than mine. It just means that's the way yours is. Now, with exercise, the heartbeat can get way up into the 150, 160, even 170, 80 range, depending upon who's doing the exercise and how trained the person is. Basically, when you exercise for the purpose of health, you want to basically exercise at a rate of about 65 to 80% of your maximum heart rate when you do cardiovascular exercise, like riding a bike or running or whatever. And the way you determine that is you determine your maximum heart rate by subtracting your age from 220 and then multiplying it by 65% and 80%. That will tell you where your heart rate should be when you're exercising. Now, basically, what happens during the course of one heartbeat, you're going to have blood entering the right side of the heart, the pulmonary circulation on the right side of the heart, into the atrium, and it's going to come through the two largest veins in the body, one from the top above the heart, one from the bottom below the heart. The one on the top is the superior vena cava, and the one on the bottom is going to be called the inferior vena cava. The blood comes in through the veins, the atria contract, and they push blood into the ventricles, and the ventricles at this time are relaxed. And then as the atria relax, the ventricles then would contract, and they push blood into the main arteries that are leaving the heart. On the right side of the heart, it would be the pulmonary trunk, or otherwise called the pulmonary artery, and on the left side, it would be the aorta, which is the largest artery of the body. Now, to keep blood from going in the wrong direction, in other words, to maintain blood moving in one direction, the heart are going to have valves in them. There are two different kinds of valves. There are one-way flaps or doors that keep the blood moving in one direction. The two sets of valves are the atrioventricular valves and the semilunar valves. First of all, the atrioventricular valves, on the right side, between the atrium and the ventricle, you're going to have a right AV, or atrioventricular valve, as it's called. That's not in the book. That's a very common term you should know. It's also called the tricuspid valve. Knowing all these terms is good because a lot of different descriptions of the heart valves are going to be using these different terms, so you probably need to know all of them. Tricuspid is called tricuspid because it has three parts to the valve, three cusps that slap together when it's trying to prevent backflow. On the left side of the heart, the left AV valve is located. It's called the bicuspid valve, and as you can guess, bicuspid means it has two parts to the valve. The more common name for this valve, though, used in medicine, is called the mitral valve. So it's got actually three names: the left AV, the bicuspid, or the mitral valve. And this keeps blood from backflowing into the atrium when the ventricles contract. Now, between the ventricles and the major arteries leading the heart, you're going to have what's called semilunar valves. Semilunar meaning lunar meaning moon, semilunar meaning like a half moon shape. And there are three of those valves that make up each of the semilunar valves. So on the right side, we have a pulmonary semilunar valve that is between the ventricle and the pulmonary trunk or pulmonary artery that's leaving the right side of the heart. And it will keep blood from going back into the ventricle. the right ventricle. On the left side, you have the aortic semilunar valve, which would be between the large artery, the aorta, and the left ventricle, and it keeps blood from backflowing into the left ventricle. So when these valves are working, they actually are making sounds. You've all probably heard of the sound of the heartbeat through a stethoscope, and that sound has been determined by some scientific person a long time ago to be lubbed up. Why, I'm not exactly sure, but those are the sounds that have been determined. The first sound, lub, whenever the heart beats, it's lubbed up, lubbed up, lubbed up. The lub part is when the ventricles are contracting. And when the ventricles are contracting, it's pushing the AV valves closed. These AV valves make a very sharp, loud sound in comparison to the other. The second sound, the dup sound, is the closing of the semilunar valves. Whenever the ventricle has finished contracting and it's relaxing and blood is trying to go back into the ventricle. The lub sound, the AV valves closing, is a little bit louder and a little bit longer, and to the trained ear, it's very obvious. The dup sound is a little bit softer and a little bit shorter. So when a doctor, a trained ear, listens to the heartbeat through the stethoscope, he knows when he's hearing a normal lubbed up sound. Sometimes he may hear extra sounds or abnormal sounds. And abnormal sounds of the heart are called a heart murmur. A heart murmur usually has to do with a malfunctioning valve. And many times this extra sound is a swish sound. The swish sound basically tells the doctor that there is a malfunction in the valve where they're allowing at the end of that closure, there's blood seeping through that valve. That's what the swish sound comes from, and it tells him that there's a problem with the valve. So a heart murmur is an abnormal heart sound. Now, we're going to kind of go into the circulatory route that the blood goes through the heart. Once again, this is a double pump or a double circulatory route situation in the mammals and the human being. The first type of circulation on the right side is called the pulmonary circulation. The pulmonary circulation starts with blood from the superior and the inferior vena cava, the largest veins in the body, dumping their deoxygenated blood into the right atrium of the heart. Deoxygenated meaning blood that has circulated throughout the entire body and has given up its oxygen and has picked up a great deal of carbon dioxide. So the blood in this particular area is going to be a dark blood, more like a deep maroon color than a bright red color. It goes into the right atrium, and then from the contraction of the atrium, it goes through the right AV valve, or the tricuspid valve, into the right ventricle. From there, the right ventricle contracts, pushes blood out of the heart through the pulmonary trunk, or otherwise known as the pulmonary artery, into and through the semilunar valve. The semilunar valve flaps shut when the contraction of the right ventricle is complete. The pulmonary trunk then branches into the right and left pulmonary artery, which takes blood to the lungs, where gas exchange is going to occur. The blood here is going to change from a dark maroon color to a bright red color because the carbon dioxide has been given up into the lungs, and oxygen has been taken up by the red blood cells in the blood, and that chemical combination of oxygen to hemoglobin in the red blood cell is going to change the color of that blood cell to a bright red color. When the blood has been oxygenated, then it returns to the heart by way of the pulmonary veins. There are 2 right and 2 left pulmonary veins. They will then empty their blood into the left atrium. And this whole route, this pulmonary circulatory route, takes about an average of 10 seconds. So we have the blood in the left atrium now, and from the left atrium, blood is pushed in through the bicuspid valve, the left AV valve, or otherwise known as the mitral valve, and it moves into the left ventricle. From the left ventricle, it contracts and pushes blood through the aorta, and it goes through the aortic semilunar valve in order to get into the aortic artery. The aorta is the largest artery of the body. It will soon branch and take blood to the above the heart and below the heart. The first branch off of the aorta, I might want to add here, is the coronary artery. The coronary artery is going to branch and go right back to the heart itself and supply the heart muscle with oxygen. So the very first organ in the body to get oxygenated blood is your heart. So from the aorta, there are branches that go up and down, and then smaller and smaller arteries throughout the body to take the blood, oxygenated blood, to the tissues of the body until it gets to the smallest of the arteries, which is called the arterioles, which lead into the capillary beds, which is where the actual exchange of nutrients and waste products occur in the tissues, which is in the capillaries. Capillaries are our smallest vessels. They're 1 cell thickness, and they're very leaky, and the exchange of gases and nutrients and things like that occur in the capillaries. From the capillaries, blood goes into the smallest veins, which are called venules, and then into larger veins, until eventually they're led back into the 2 largest veins of the body, the vena cava, the superior and inferior vena cava. And then the blood will return, and we start our route back to the right atrium, and it starts all over again. Generally speaking, the circulatory route takes about a minute in a normal person. So what I'd like you to know is the circulatory route that I've just given you here. So make sure that that you know all the steps and all the anatomy involved in the one-way movement of blood through the human heart. And that'll be it for today. Adios, amibas.